fabulous to be here. So thank you very much to the Reach team for inviting me. I'm hoping to find a partner for table tennis doubles in the next Paralympics, because I'm assuming that's what these are for. Some of you may remember me as the author of Shared Experiences, but I know I'm going to be meeting many of you for the first time, and I really look forward to that. My talk today is mainly about my experiences during my working life working with limb difference. And I'll be talking about people's attitudes towards me back in the dark days of the early 1980s. I recognise that we're all different and that all of our experiences are unique to us. So, this is me back in the early 80s as a customs officer in Terminal 3 at Heathrow Airport. Now, when I joined Customs in 1980, I joined as a clerk, but I nursed an ambition to become a uniformed customs officer. This photo appeared on the front of the Sunday Times magazine, which was following a fly-on-the-wall documentary called The Duty Men, which I had a few walk-on parts. And this photo really sums up my role at the time, which was to stand at the front of the green and red channels, and then I would be looking at passengers, summing up how they were walking with their baggage. Were they overly friendly? Were they very nervous? Was their trolley shaking like this? And to find prohibited items. At that time, we were mainly interested in finding drugs. So during my years as a customs officer, I was supported by colleagues. I did receive some unpleasantness. Any discrimination that I endured, I'm going to say, was actually at a personal level rather than an organisational level. And I was aware that I was working with people who were suspicious of my ability to do the job. So it wasn't about me as a person, but they actually thought that I wasn't going to find much. And I think they fell into that trap of thinking that because you have a limb difference, that your stump or your limb doesn't do anything. So I think they imagined me saying, excuse me, sir, come over here, bring your suitcase there, open your suitcase, and just doing this, like I was in some sort of lottery or, find the toy. And I don't think they realised that I would be using my stump and that I would be able to use my fingers and my stump to see whether or not that was a false-bottomed suitcase. And one of my best ever drug seizures was actually pushing my stump down to the bottom of a trainer and finding loads of cocaine. What a party that was. And so I really felt that I had to, and this is a cliche because when I speak to lots of my Reach tribe about it, we all feel we've got to overachieve to some extent. We've got to work twice as hard to be as good as other people, and it's just in us. We feel we've got to do it because we don't want to be pitted, or we don't want to be looked upon as somebody who's just there to be that disability tick or whatever it is. So there were two things happening, is that I wanted to really work hard. I also wanted, there was sexism was also a barrier, because in the early 80s, people's view of customs was still from a customs, Ladybird, How to be a Customs Officer book. And back then, in the 70s, there was a grade called Women Search Officer. And so nobody actually became a customs officer because that was for men. So it was several barriers that I was breaking through. But as well as my colleagues, sometimes members of the public, passengers, would react in different ways when I was searching through their bags. So I sort of got used to just laughing it off, joking, because that's such a great coping mechanism. But there was one day I was in the Channel, And I stopped this man, and he was easy to stop. You would have all stopped him because he had horizontal sweat beads coming off him. And he was walking through the Green Channel, doing the walk of the trolley. He wasn't like this. And when I said, "Excuse me, sir, can you come over here?" "Who, me?" Looking behind. So he came over and opened his suitcase. And I found concealments of drugs in several places. To be honest, they weren't that hard to find, but he was so upset with himself. And at the time, what you used to do is pretend that you hadn't found the drugs. And that meant that you could then say goodbye to the person, and there was a secret code word you gave for one of your colleagues about finding it. They would then get in touch with our colleagues who were in civies. Then your person who you'd found the drugs would go out with their trolley thinking they got away with it. You would see who they met and you'd arrest everybody. Can you see how that is? So I packed, and you have to keep it going a long while because it takes 10 or 15 minutes to get everybody outside in the public area. So I'm closing his suitcase and I'm making a meal with the zip. And eventually I say, "Okay, sir, thank you, you're free to go." So he's leaning over, kissing me. "Oh, you lovely lady, thank you very much. It was wonderful, great." And off he trots. And then 10 minutes later, he's brought in under arrest with his mates, looking very sorry for himself. So we start, he's arrested, take the tape recorded interview, and he starts off by talking about the shame of it. That his concealments were so bad that they were found by a one-handed customs officer. So I really enjoyed reading all that out in my notebook when we went to court. As the years went on, I did realise that HM Customs and Excise as it was then, and HM Revenue and Customs as it became, they did like a poster girl, because it was quite nice for them to say, even back then, that we embrace diversity and inclusion. So I did find myself being interviewed, doing lots of bits and pieces for them, which I was really happy to do, because part of our responsibility, for those of us with limb difference in the room, is to pave the way for the next generation. All those little babies and toddlers coming in, we should be the role models, and we should be making sure that we're always banging that drum to employers so that it becomes natural. And I think we're almost in a golden age now of disability inclusion, but we mustn't ever take that for granted, because if we don't carry on speaking out, then if you don't go forward, you're going to start rolling back. So I did mention a little bit of discrimination, and that was because I applied for a role which was part of our tarmac and rummage, and that was searching aircrafts. And I put the application in, and the head of that team came to see me and said, under no circumstances are you going to work outside searching aircraft. It's really unsafe for somebody with one hand to do, and no, you can't. And he withdrew the application. And for me, rejected it. And I actually had a feeling at the time, well, actually good, because I don't want to go to a party that I'm not welcome at. I'd rather concentrate on work where I can make a difference. So, why am I now at the REACH conference in 2004 with the late, great Jeremy Beadle and the amazing James Thompson, and I don't know who else is in the room from that particular conference? The reason that I was there was that I had joined a Home Office counter-terrorism team, and I was put on a project called Cyclamen. This is after 9/11, and the government was really concerned about the dirty bomb. And so they spent £160 million installing radiation detection equipment in the UK. My job was to write training material, go all around ports and airports, all around the UK, and give briefings so that customs officers at ports would see the importance of the work. And in my research, I found some photographs of children with birth defects from the terrible nuclear disaster at Chernobyl. And REACH kept popping up in the Google box. So I just picked up the phone and called, and I spoke to Sue Stokes, and she was incredible. So I told her a little bit about my story, and she just said, well, we're having a conference in 2 months' time. Will you come and speak? And I went, yeah, okay then. And so my husband and my daughter and I, we all set off. And that weekend really changed my life, because I was 40 years old, and up until I'd spoken to Sue, I'd never heard of Reach. And yet in the late 70s, there'd been a lot in the newspapers about myoelectric hands, and Reach was part of that. But certainly my parents had not heard of Reach. I hadn't heard of Reach. And then I realised that, and as an adult, I had an opportunity to mainly talk to parents, actually, about growing up with a limb difference, because so many parents did have concerns about what the future would be like for their children. The following year, I ended up at another Reach weekend, and I think it was Portsmouth. And the purpose of the workshop that I ran on the Sunday was to say, hey parents, what is it that's happening for you? And some of the disclosures made around that table were really heart-warming, and some of them were really distressing. Some of the things that the medical profession had said to new parents, such as, are you related to the father? Is it a genetic? Is it because you're too close a relation? What type of drugs or tablets did you take? There was still evidence that the medical profession was trying to blame the parents for the what is really a naturally occurring event, and in some cases there is evidence of genetic links. So I took a lot from that. Then I sent out a survey and started asking parents lots of questions about, did you find out before the birth? And if not, what happened at the birth? What type of support did you have? What worked, what didn't work? And in the end, I say I wrote this book. The parents wrote the book, and I think I collated it. So then I decided to really try and push that book into the medical arena, and I know that Sean and Julie were very instrumental in talking to the National Council of Midwifery, or any of those words in any order, so that we were able to put that book where it was required. And then there were other disclosures. I found out my aunt was dying, and I spoke to her, and she wanted to tell me a family secret. And what happened was, back in the early 30s, I had 2 twin uncles who were born, and one of them was born without any arms. And at the time, this is before the National Health Service, and your midwife would happen to be some woman who lived down the road. And they came into the house and he was born, and they did something called leaving the baby out. So if you had a disabled child, and it was profoundly disabled, they would go and leave it out in the backyard. And if it was alive the next morning, then that would be okay. So there was this little baby, Leonard. He was put outside on top of the coal shuttle, and the next morning he was dead. He wasn't dead because of his limb difference. He was dead because it was December. So all of these things, I mean, I don't want to be doomy and gloomy, but what I want to say is we celebrate now because we live in really enlightened times. But it's only in my parents' generation that this type of thing was still happening. And that motivates me. I'm also motivated by the fact that Reach needs funds to carry on doing what it does now and into the future. So I got heavily involved in putting on different fundraising events. So this is a Reach event called Best of British, where we all had a bit of a sing-song, had an auction, had a raffle. It was great fun. And then one of my friends came to me and she said, had a great idea. Why don't we all jump out of aircrafts? So I said, oh, that's a fabulous idea. Why don't you jump out the aircraft and I'll do the tombola at the airfield? And that's what we did twice. And it was great because we made a lot of money, fantastic tombola, but also you never know who you're speaking to. You know, it's sometimes the ultimate elevator pitch because you can raise awareness, you talk to people about what Reach does, and they always say, well, I knew somebody with a missing arm, hand, finger once, and you know, you're able to make those connections. So I absolutely loved the fundraising, but I never felt I was doing it on my own. So these are two friends of mine, Nick and Peter, and they phoned me one day and they said, we've had this super idea. We are going to cycle around Iceland to raise money for Reach. So first I had to establish that it was the country and not the shop. And that's what they did. And they raised several £1,000s. And when they came back, force multiply, they said, well, it'd be a really good idea if we spoke to people about this epic adventure. And so they put on a fundraising dinner. So I'm looking across at Sian and Julie, who travelled from both ends of the country to be there. So I want to say is that anybody involved in fundraising, you have fabulous trustees and you will get the support and they will come along and help wherever they can. So I really want, can we give our trustees a big round of applause, please? So, here I am, handcuffing people. So while all this was my fundraising and my Reach and my shared experience stuff was going on, the world had changed because I was promoted and put back into Border Force. And they'd brought in this new rule that if you were an operational frontline officer or manager, you had to go on a handcuff safety training course. And of course, they then said, well, we don't know how you're going to do this. And the debates were going on and on, not always with me there. And I then had to say, I can put on some handcuffs, but there has to be an adjustment because I will only be able to put them in a certain way. So the instructors were ex-army and ex-military police, and they came up with some ways for me to put on handcuffs in a way that made me safe and my colleagues safe. And one of the things that always made me laugh was that when I did get in, the only damage that was ever done, we got into a scuffle with a Russian bodybuilder who was, I'm going to lie, he was 7 foot tall, but you know, he was big. And it took about 4 of us and he'd been stealing from the duty-free shop, and then he was trying to come back in through the Green Channel. It took about 4 of us to bring him down to the floor. So by the time I got involved in the part of it, I had 4 of my colleagues each had an arm, so I didn't actually have an active role. But one of them shouted, phone, phone. And what you want to do is make sure that your arrested person never grabs hold of something that they can use to injure you. So I thought, this is my chance. So I went running along and I kicked this iPhone all the way down the Green Channel, like, yes, he has not got that weapon. And my colleague turned around to me and went, that was my phone. But I have got my handcuff keys with me. I have them in every jacket pocket. And it was only last year I stopped finding them. So, yeah, I've got some props. So after that, every day was weird. One day I'd be doing handcuff training. The next day I'd have the British Airways Air Cabin Crew Entertainment Society come round and give Reach a check. And that was because I just used to talk about what Reach did everywhere in shameless attempts to get people to give corporate donations. It does work. Anywhere you go, talk about Reach. And then carried on doing lots of fundraising in our local village, asking people all through the year, can you give me your unwanted presents and bits and pieces, and I will sell them for Reach. And it was good fun. You do it because it's fun. And I then became a director of EDRIC, which is now DISNET. And DISNET is a European organisation that supports people with all types of limb difference around Europe. But I had this dream. I did not want to be in law enforcement until I was 60 years old. I had really been enlightened by my experiences with Reach, and I wanted to go and work in the third sector because I believed that I could add some value. So got a job at my local hospice as the volunteer services manager, and was helping recruit volunteers for 16 charity shops and all of our community fundraising groups. Really enjoyed working with volunteers who put on activities for patients. This is the Dulux dog who came to visit us one day, spent far too much time talking to the dog, which then made me think, wow, I really love dogs and cats, so maybe I can go and work in animal welfare. So in July 2015, I started at Battersea Dogs and Cats Home as the head of volunteering and fostering. And that was the best job. I was there 8 years, best job I've ever had in my life. Occupational hazard of working in animal welfare is you bring your work home and you don't take it back. So my husband and I, we had little Max on foster. He just proved too cute. We kept him. It was great. I could talk to foster carers about my experience of fostering. The lived experience is everywhere in life. It's not just about limb difference. It's about what we do. And so I was working at a senior level, involved in strategy, realised I had opportunities to make a lot of roles for volunteers more inclusive and actually bring in more volunteers and foster carers with disability, including a category volunteer who actually was visually impaired. So got involved in community fundraising because I love wearing a hat. So, and community fundraising actually is where it is at, because you get out there and you talk to people. So where am I now? Then last year I retired from Battersea. Just missed out a whole point about Battersea and a reasonable adjustment, so I will skip back to it. I'd mentioned Border Force and having to do safety training, arrest training. At Battersea, I had to do safety around dogs training, and they had to come up with these adjustments so that it would be safe for me to handle some of the bigger dogs. And then, here we are. This is at Reach a few years ago. So you've got Sean, who puts the fun into fundraising. And I've just realised I'm minus 2 minutes, so I'm now going to round up, and I'm just going to say thank you for joining me on that little tour of my career thus far. Thank you.
Charlotte Fielder. Brilliant. Thank you, Charlotte. That was absolutely wonderful. We've got time for one quick question. And first of all, I do apologise. That was probably me going through that channel back in the 80s.
Was you?
Yeah.
I didn't say.
So can I have my suitcase back, by the way?
If I can keep the Coke, yeah.
Really quickly, you've been with Reach, a long time. You found Reach, later, as you said. Any advice for? I really like to focus on our new families when we come for these weekends, because I can imagine it's all quite overwhelming how much is going on. Have you got any advice for them about how to make the most of this weekend?
Yes. So it's okay to cry. I think a lot of people, when they come to their first weekends, are overwhelmed by the support and the love and that sense of being part of a family. So it's so as an adult, I felt that, and I think it's really good to have that feeling. I would try and make as many friends as possible. Get lots of telephone numbers, put people on your Facebook, because there are times, certainly I think, when people feel they're quite alone with a problem. So if you've made some contacts and connections, especially from people who might be a couple of years further on than you, how lovely is it to say, look, my son's just starting school, I'm worried about bullying, to speak to somebody whose child has been at school 2 years. So I think that connection is really important.
And those different stages of life, of course, you suddenly get to another stage and think, oh, what about this? And actually talking about groups, I do know that there's WhatsApp groups, there's Facebook groups, so please do make sure you speak to the team outside at lunchtime or any of the other breaks to make sure you make those contacts and get hold of people. And finally, just before we let you go, your time in Reach, now that you are somebody seeing all these new families and people coming up through, what's inspiring you about the future of Reach and the future of our families who are joining us today?
Well, I've heard about a few changes that Reach wants to make to its constitution, how it wants to broaden the scope of what it does. So I think now, when I first joined Reach, it was all about children with limb difference. Then over the last few years, I've seen the brilliant work that Emily Tishaw has done, and that the Reach retreat happened, and now there is this movement towards really supporting young adults. So that's great. And I think Reach is a lifelong journey. So as Reach expands its purpose to look after people with limb difference, yes, it will always be about the children primarily, because that's almost the entry level. So I think Reach is great. It's forward focused, and it has so much it wants to achieve in the future. I think we just have to make sure that we all carry on in our own way, doing the fundraising to support it. So yeah, well done, Reach, for what you're doing.
Thank you very much indeed. Charlotte Fielder, thank you.
Thank you.